So have you ever felt like you wanted to push a fast forward button in life? Just skip. We're so used to being, in our digital culture. I've actually found that when I was editing videos back in the day, I was so good at shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, that I actually started doing them in real life. Like when I was cooking and I put the wrong thing in, I would do this keyboard shortcut, undo. And I was like, what? I've definitely spent too much time at the computer. Well, sometimes in life we do just feel like hitting the undo button or the skip ahead button. And you might feel this in a particularly painful season or situation that's just messy or complicated. Maybe it's a conflict at work. You walk into work with a knot in your stomach because you know you're going to run into that one individual. And you leave work with a migraine. You dread work on Sunday afternoon. You're thinking about Monday on Sunday afternoon, thinking, I just want to skip. And I think, I just want to fast forward till the conflict's over. Maybe it's a relationship, a marriage that's grown cold, a friendship that is fractured, a child who walked away and won't return your phone calls. It's awkward, it's heavy, and it's one of those things that hangs over your life like a dark cloud every single day. And in those moments, we pray. We all pray a similar prayer, don't we? We might use different words, but at the heart of the prayer, it's the same. We pray the fast forward prayer. God, fix it. God, just fix it. I don't care how you do it. I don't really care about the details. I don't really even want a lesson here. Just fast forward. Give me the peace. We've all been there. I've been there. We want the destination without the journey. Now, here's the thing. In many of our lives, that desire is a good instinct. The shortcut, it's actually a good thing. And there's this author that's named Steven Pinker, and he wrote this fascinating book a few years ago called Enlightenment Now. And in the book, he makes this incredible point about progress. He argues, for the vast majority of human history, human beings have spent most of their time just trying to stay alive. Think about it. 200 years ago, if you wanted water, you didn't turn a handle. You walked to a creek. Keith, you might remember those days. You had to fill a bucket and carry it back. If you wanted heat, you didn't just fix the thermostat, you chopped wood. If you wanted clean clothes, you didn't toss them in the laundry machine. You spent hours scrubbing, rinsing, hanging, etc. But then technology happened. We got indoor plumbing. We got washing machines. Pinker points out that in 1920, the average American spent 11 and a half hours doing laundry each week. By 2014, that number plummeted to an hour and a half. Suddenly, hours and hours of daily labor collapsed into minutes. Technology gave us a shortcut. And listen to me, I'm saying that's a pretty good shortcut. I love my dishwasher. You love your washing machine. We love our cars that allow us to drive 60 kilometers an hour to work instead of walking. And Pinker says these shortcuts have returned thousands of hours to our lives such that they've given us time for leisure, creativity, more relationships. So for good reasons, we have been formed by the shortcut. But here's the problem. If we aren't careful, we'll start to think that what works for our laundry works for all aspects of our life. We begin to develop a worldview that's something like this. If it takes a long time, we say, there must be a workaround. There must be a faster way to do this. There's got to be a better way. I find myself saying that all the time. So we begin to trust the shortcut. We become formed by the shortcut. But sometimes, and this is what I want to explore today, is that the shortcut is an act of self-deception. And nowhere is this more obvious right now than in the world of education. We're seeing this interesting phenomenon called cognitive offloading, is what the researchers are calling it. Cognitive offloading. Here's the scenario. You're a student. You're assigned a paper. You have to write a paper on the Roman Empire. And if you're a teacher, you know the goal of the assignment isn't to come up with another paper on the Roman Empire. The goal of the assignment is for the student to do the reading, for them to wrestle with complex ideas, for them to hit those mental roadblocks and know how to push through. It was all about the formation the whole time. It was about forming a mind that knows how to think. But today, students can open their laptop, go to the AI tool of their choice, type in a prompt, and in 30 seconds, boom, B+ paper. Perfect grammar, good structure, done. But the researchers are rightly warning us, these results are hollow. They've skipped the struggle, and they suffer from something called cognitive atrophy. They got the outcome, but they missed the formation, the actual learning. It was a shortcut, but they were deceived. They didn't get anything at all. And one of the major concerns among psychologists is that AI gives students an unearned sense of fluency. All that means is because they can develop a high quality answer quickly, they believe they understand the high quality concept. But in reality, they haven't built the mental scaffolding to reach that conclusion on their own. And here's why I'm telling you this. We too can treat our God like this. We can come to God and prompt him for peace. God, fix my marriage. God, take away my anxiety. We want the breakthrough. We want the feeling of being okay. But we'd rather just skip the formation that comes from walking through the valley. We want the grade without the class. But Jesus said something that stops us in our tracks. In John 14, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Notice the order. I am the way. The way comes first. Jesus is not an abstract concept that you simply understand and accept and believe and applaud. Kierkegaard talked about this. He said that's actually a danger in the church. We can all sit around and applaud Jesus. Wow, you are so great. Meanwhile, it doesn't affect our lives in a real way. Kierkegaard said we need to walk the way of Jesus. You cannot have the truth of Jesus or the life of Jesus without walking the way of Jesus. When we follow him over time, he helps us. But it's over time that we become virtuous people. People of faith, hope, love, wisdom, self-control, courage, justice. And I know I am not there. Constantly, day by day, I wrestle against my own flesh and blood and say, I'm such a sinner. God, help. And thankfully, that's the nuts and bolts of Christianity, is that we all just need to believe that about ourselves. None of us are perfect. We're all in need of grace. Kevin sent me, where's Kevin? Kevin sent me a beautiful picture. What did the caption say? Formed by grace or held by grace? Held by grace. I think that's the perfect description of our situation. So Saul, in 1 Samuel chapter 13, he took a shortcut. And let's see what it cost him. Here's the situation. We read about it, but I'll just kind of quickly go over it. Saul's son Jonathan was a bit of a firecracker, and he picked a fight with the Philistines. He attacked their garrison, and he defeated them. But the Philistines are furious. He attacked a bee's nest, essentially, and they decide to end this little rebellion once and for all. Verse 5 tells us what happens next. The Philistines mustered to fight with Israel 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops like the sand on the seashore in multitude. Can you imagine? Troops like the sand of the seashore, 30,000 chariots. That's a massive killing force. And what does Saul have? Verse 2 says he started with 3,000 men. But as soon as the Philistine army showed up, his men start panicking, and they start looking at the math, and they understand their situation, so they run, and they're hiding in caves and holes in the ground. You might say, well, why were they scared? They're soldiers. Well, they were definitely outnumbered. We know that, but it's worse than that. In verse 19, you got to check out this tiny little detail that many of us might skip over, but historians tell us this is the key to understand their situation. It says, now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make themselves swords and spears. So do you see what's happening there? The Philistines were technologically far superior. They had come from the Aegean Sea, and they knew the secrets of iron. They knew how to smelt it. They knew how to forge it. And Israel was still in the Bronze Age. If an Israelite farmer needed to sharpen his plowshare or axe or sickle, he had to travel to the Philistines. He had to pay them to sharpen their tools. It was total dependency. It was humiliating. And look at the result in verse 22. So on the day of battle, there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any people with Saul and Jonathan. But Saul and Jonathan, his son, had them. 2 swords. In the entire army, there was 2 swords. Saul has one and Jonathan has one. Everybody else, we can only imagine what they had. Pitchforks, a sharpened stick, a heavy rock. So let's put yourself in Saul's shoes for a second. If you're the king and you have 30,000 iron chariots and your men, you look around, we're holding farm tools, they're quitting, they're running away. And you're in this chaos and you're remembering what the prophet Samuel told you. The word of God over you was this, one instruction: wait 7 days. I will come, I will offer a sacrifice, and then I'll tell you what to do. Go to Gilgal, wait 7 days, then I will come. I will offer a sacrifice. I'll tell you what to do. This seems like an eternity. Can you imagine the stress of what his advisors might be saying in Saul's tent? Saul, look at the numbers. We're down to 600 men. If you don't do something now, there's going to be no one left to lead. Saul, this is what leadership demands. Somebody that can make tough decisions, do something. And to Saul's credit, he kind of waited 7 days. But day 7 comes and Saul looks around. Samuel's not there yet. He looks at the fear in his men's eyes. He looks at the threat on the horizon. He says, bring the burnt offering to me. Now you need to understand, this is not just like a little thing. This is a big thing. In the Old Testament, the separation between the king and the priest was absolute. A king could not offer the sacrifices. That was the role of the prophet and the priest, and it was forbidden. But Saul thinks, I need God's favor, and I need it now. I need a shortcut. So he lights the fire, and he offers the animal. He gets the ritual done and checks the box. And immediately, the text says, it's like a movie script. Who shows up? Behold, Samuel. He smells the smoke, I'm sure, and he sees the altar, and he looks at the king, and he asks the question that echoes, what have you done? Now watch Saul's reaction. This is where the mirror gets, I think, in our faces. Saul doesn't say, I panicked, I disobeyed, I'm so sorry. No, Saul gives us a masterclass in excuses. Let's count them. There's 5. There's an external pressure. He says, I saw that the people were scattering. He blame shifts. You didn't come within the time that you had appointed. There's fear-based urgency. They were mustering Samuel. They were going to come and attack at any second. There was this pious excuse. I needed to seek the favor of the Lord. And then he says what maybe is the most revealing of all. I forced myself to do it. I forced myself. He's saying, I knew the right way. I knew what I was supposed to do. I didn't want to do this, Samuel, but the pressure was too high. The cost was too great, so I forced it. I bypassed the command to get the result. And this is where we really need to pause and see Saul, because Saul is a lot like us. Saul was looking at his circumstances and using them to justify disobedience. He had allowed the outcome that he wanted to be his God, his ultimate aim. And tragically, in all that looking, he lost sight of the only thing that really mattered. He forgot that God, his God, was the God who parted the Red Sea, the God who has mastery over complex situations, the God who served. He forgot the God he served was the God who toppled Jericho. Saul's problem wasn't that his problem was too big. It was that his God had become too small. He traded God's omnipotence for the control of a shortcut. And friends, this is the most seductive part. The dangerous part about the shortcut is that it works. It works, at least on the surface. Think back to the student who uses AI to pass his midterm exam. He gets the B+. He passes the class. He gets a diploma. In the short term, he wins. They get the outcome without the work, without the fear. Saul's just like that student. He got what he wanted. No doubt when he took action, everybody around him applauded. The panic in the camp probably subsided. He saved face. He looked like a good leader. And as we'll see in later weeks, Israel even goes on to survive this encounter. So it kind of worked. And that's the seductive part about activity. By taking the shortcut, Saul got what he wanted, but he missed the opportunity to be formed by God. He missed the chance to stand on the edge of disaster, look at impossible odds, wait on the Lord, and watch him show up. He missed the miracle. And when you wait on the Lord, it says in Scripture, those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. You have to do the waiting. You have to, and it's painful, it's scary, it's fearful, and it's probably not what you want to do. But when you wait on the Lord and you see him show up, there is nothing that forms your soul like that. Instead of being formed by dependency, God is my strength. He was formed by self-reliance. He says, when things get tough, I can fix it. He walked away with the tactile victory, but he walked away with spiritual atrophy. And friends, we can win the battle and still lose our soul. You can save your reputation and lose your character. That's the tragedy of the shortcut. So Samuel sees right through it. He looks at the king and says, "You've done foolishly. You haven't kept the command of the Lord your God. The Lord your God would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not continue." He lost the dynasty of Saul. As we know, it becomes the house of David, which is a great show, by the way, if you want to watch a good show. There's one more detail in the text, I think, that kind of summarizes this tragedy perfectly. It's a geographical detail, so you just pay close attention. It's in verse 7. While Saul is at Gilgal trembling, look at what some of the Hebrews were doing. It says, "And some Hebrews crossed the fjords of the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead." Okay, let's do a little geography. The promised land, Canaan, the place of God's promise and assignment, is west of the Jordan River. Generations earlier, Joshua and the people miraculously crossed the Jordan from the east to the west. It was a huge moment. God parted the waters. They walked through on dry ground. But now the pressure's on. And what do? They cross the Jordan again, this time in the wrong direction. They go east. They go to Gad and Gilead. They're uncrossing the Jordan. They are physically reversing the conquest. And there's a spiritual principle that I believe is here. The way of God, when it gets hard, our instincts want to uncross the Jordan, retreat to safety. We leave the promised land and run back to the desert. We do this all the time. God called you to be generous, but when the economy gets scary, you uncross the Jordan, you stop giving. You're called to live truthfully, but telling the truth starts to cost you, so you soften it. You become vague and you tell yourself, "I'm just being wise." You uncross the Jordan. You're called to trust God with your future, but the waiting is painful, so you stop asking God what he wants to do in your life, and you start doing what feels safe. You uncross the Jordan. They wanted safety more than they wanted the promise of God. Let me give you a picture of this that I hope you can remember beyond today. A picture of two men who took two different approaches, two different ways. In 1911, the world watched a race to discover the South Pole. It was the last great prize of exploration. The race was between two men, Robert Falcon Scott, a British naval captain, and Ronald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer. They were heading to the same destination. They wanted the same result, but they took two completely different ways. Scott took the British approach. He was extremely well-funded, and he believed in this idea of noble struggle. He wanted to conquer the pole with British grit and technology. So he imported his way on the terrain. He brought motorized sledges, brand new tech, but they broke down almost immediately in the cold. He brought Manchurian ponies, but ponies sweat, and in Antarctica, the sweat froze and the ponies died. Ultimately, Scott relied on something called man-hauling, which was just exactly like it sounds. The men strapped themselves in and they pulled thousands of pounds through the snow. And he saw it as being more noble, a way to impose your will on the terrain. He fought the ice. Amundsen was the Norwegian. He was underfunded. He had a completely different approach. He didn't have the funding or the status, but he had humility. Years earlier, he spent time living with the Inuit in the Arctic. He realized these people have survived here for thousands of years. I know nothing, they know everything. So the British wore heavy wool coats that froze and got wet, Amundsen watched the Inuit. They wore loose-fitting furs that breathed. The British looked down on using dogs. Amundsen realized that dogs were the only way to travel across the ice. So he learned to drive dog sleds. He paced his journey. He stored his food. He humbled himself to the terrain. He didn't impose his way. He sought to find out the way, and he submitted to it. Amundsen's journey was described by historians as having a boring efficiency. He glided across the ice, arriving in the North Pole December 14th, 1911. He planted the Norwegian flag and left a letter for Scott. And he skied home without losing a single man. Scott, on the other hand, wrote in his diary when he arrived 34 days later, "The worst has happened. Great God, this is an awful place," he said. The return journey was a nightmare for Scott. They fought the terrain with their own strength. They refused to adapt. They exhausted themselves. And all 5 men died, frozen and starving, just 11 miles from an outpost that would have saved their life. Well, what did we learn? One man tried to force his way onto the terrain. The other man humbled himself to the way of the terrain. Our life is a treacherous terrain. Sin, suffering, mortality, relationships, spiritual warfare. Picture this as the ice. You can't manhaul your way through it. You can't force yourself like Saul and expect to survive. You can't use an AI prompt to skip the cold. If you try to impose your will on God's world, you will break. The terrain doesn't care about your resume. The terrain demands humility. And this brings us to Jesus. Because we have a guide who knows the terrain. Jesus didn't just come flying in over the suffering. He didn't use a shortcut. This Christmas season, we're reminded that he came. He humbled himself to our terrain. Just like Amundsen wore the furs of the Inuit, God clothed himself in our flesh. He now knows what betrayal feels like. He knows what physical limitation feels like. He knows what it feels like to have a friend that falls asleep when you need them. He knows what death feels like. Think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Talk about pressure. Talk about an impossible situation. The soldiers are coming, just like the Philistines. His friends are sleeping, just like the people scattering on Saul. And Jesus has a choice. He could have uncrossed the Jordan. He could have called down 12,000 legions of angels. He could have escaped. He could have chosen safety. He could have demanded the result without the way. But what does he do? He says, "Not my will, but yours be done." Jesus submitted to the Father's way and won the kingdom for all of us. I was talking about Kierkegaard earlier, and he says this one thing that really kind of astonished me. He said, we have to understand that Christ is our guide, but he is both behind us and ahead of us. He is lower than you'll ever be and higher and loftier than you will ever imagine. He's behind us. He's the lowly sufferer. He's the foot washer. He's the one who's carrying the cross. He's looking at us and he's pointing at your footsteps. He's saying, I know this part. I was here too. I wept here too. I bled here too. Don't run from the suffering. This is how you are formed. Let me form you. Let me walk with you. We cannot forsake the Christ that's behind us. That's how we get formed. But we also look ahead in hope to the Christ who's ahead of us. He's the resurrected King. He's the one who's already planted the flag at the destination. He's saying, I've conquered this terrain. Death couldn't hold me. If you walk with me, you will arrive where I am, and you will share in my glory. He's saying, follow me. We want the crown without the cross sometimes, but you can't have resurrection without crucifixion. Humble yourself to what God has laid in front of you. What are you trying to force right now? Where are you acting like Saul? Where are you trying to uncross the Jordan, to run back to an old relationship, an old addiction, an old coping mechanism because obedience feels risky? Stop man-hauling. Stop trying to drag the heavy sled of your life by your own willpower. You'll die on the ice. Instead, humble yourself to the way. The peace you want can't be prompted. can't be manufactured, can't be seized, can only be found in the quiet, steady, sometimes difficult, but always faithful way of Christ, who says, I am the way.